I'm over 55, I worked my entire life, and I have nothing to show for it. I need to say something that I've been carrying around for a long time. Not weeks, not months, years, decades. Honestly, if I'm being completely truthful with myself, which is something I have not always been great at. I'm over 55 years old. I have worked since I was a teenager. I have never stopped working, never taken an extended break, never had a period in my adult life where I wasn't showing up somewhere, clocking in, doing the job, collecting the paycheck, and starting the whole cycle over again the following Monday. I have worked in heat and in cold. I have worked jobs I loved and jobs I hated and jobs I was completely indifferent to. I have worked for good bosses and terrible bosses and bosses who didn't know I existed. I have given my time, my energy, my body, my best years to the simple act of working. And today, right now, at this point in my life where I should be thinking about slowing down, where I should be looking at what I built and feeling some sense of security about what comes next, I have no savings. I have no home that belongs to me. I have no retirement account worth speaking of. I have nothing, in the financial sense of that word, that represents the decades I put in. I want to say that clearly, without softening it, without wrapping it in qualifications, because for too long I have been softening it, qualifying it, telling myself and everyone around me a version of this story that was easier to hear. The easier version goes something like, things have been tough, but they're getting better. The easier version says, I'm managing, it's fine, I've just had some bad luck. The easier version keeps the real version at arm's length, where it can't do too much damage, where it can't be fully seen. But the real version is what I just told you. Worked my whole life, have nothing to show for it. And that is the story I am finally ready to tell. I started working young, not because anyone sat me down and explained the value of work ethic, not because I had some burning ambition that needed an outlet. I started working young because there was a need, and I was able to fill it. My family didn't have extra. My family had enough, barely, on most months, and not quite enough on some others. So when the opportunity came to contribute, I took it. I was 16 the first time I had a real job, the kind where someone hands you a form to fill out and takes taxes out of your check. I worked at a grocery store, stocking shelves on weekend mornings before the store opened. I remember the sound of that place at 5 in the morning, the hum of the refrigeration units, the squeak of my sneakers on the freshly mopped floor, the particular smell of cardboard boxes and produce. I remember thinking that getting a paycheck felt like being a real person, like crossing a threshold into something adult and serious. What I did not think about at 16 was what I would do with that paycheck beyond spending it. And I spent it. Not irresponsibly, not wildly. I bought things I needed, and a few things I wanted, and I helped at home when I could. But the idea of saving, of setting aside even a small percentage of what I earned for some future version of myself, never entered my mind. Nobody suggested it. Nobody modeled it. The people I grew up around operated the same way I would spend the next 4 decades operating, which was, money comes in, money goes out, you survive the month, and then you do it again. That was the entire financial education I received. Survival, cyclical and reliable, but survival. By my early 20s, I was working full-time. I took whatever job made sense at the time, whatever was available, whatever paid enough to cover rent and food and transportation, and leave a little left over. I wasn't picky because I couldn't afford to be picky. I learned early that in my world, in the economic reality I inhabited, the luxury of waiting for the right job or the perfect opportunity was not a luxury I had access to. You take what's available, you show up, you do the work, and you hope that something better comes along eventually. Or you stop hoping and just keep showing up, because showing up is what you know how to do. I moved a lot in my 20s. Different cities, different apartments, different jobs, always renting, always month to month, always with that particular low-grade anxiety of someone who knows their housing situation is one bad month away from becoming a crisis. I never thought of buying a home in those years. It felt like something that happened to other people, people with different circumstances, different access, different luck. The idea of a down payment was almost abstract. Where would that money come from? From the paycheck that covered rent and food and utilities and left $40 at the end of the month? From the savings account I didn't have? Home ownership felt like a different country. I knew it existed. I just didn't have a passport. By my 30s, I had settled into a more stable pattern, same city for longer stretches, same job for a few years at a time. The chaos of my 20s gave way to a kind of grinding routine that was less dramatic, but not fundamentally different in its financial reality. I was earning more in absolute terms than I had earned at 20, but I was also paying more. Rent had gone up. The cost of everything had gone up, and the raises I received at work were never quite enough to outpace the increases in what it cost just to exist. So the math stayed the same. Money in, money out, zero left over, repeat. There was a period in my mid-30s when I thought things were about to genuinely change. I had gotten a promotion at work, a real one, with a title and a meaningful increase in pay. For about 6 months, I felt something I can only describe as cautious optimism. I started thinking about opening a savings account, actually putting money into it and leaving it there. I started thinking about whether buying a place might be possible at some point in the not-too-distant future. I started looking at the next 10 years and imagining them being different from the 10 years behind me. That feeling lasted about 6 months before life intervened, the way life has a habit of doing when you start to relax your guard. My mother got sick. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but progressively, over the course of about 2 years. She needed more help than she had before, more support, more of my time, and, increasingly, more of my money. I helped because she was my mother, and there was no question in my mind that helping was the right thing to do. I am not resentful of that. I want to be clear about that. Helping her was not the wrong choice, but it had a cost. It had a financial cost that I was not in a position to absorb without consequences. The savings I had been starting to build got depleted. The forward momentum I had felt during those optimistic 6 months slowed, then stopped, then reversed. And when she passed a few years later, and I looked at where I was financially, I was behind where I had been before the promotion. Not through any dramatic failure, not through any single catastrophic decision, just through the slow accumulation of life, of the kind of obligations that don't show up in any financial planning guide, because they're not optional. They're just what you do when someone you love needs you. I want to tell you about the moment I remember most clearly. The moment that I come back to when I try to understand, honestly, how I got where I am. It was not a Tuesday afternoon this time. It was a Saturday morning, about 3 years ago. I had woken up earlier than I wanted to, the way you do when you're carrying something heavy, when your sleep is never quite deep enough to let you fully escape what you're carrying. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table of the apartment I was renting, and opened a letter I had been avoiding for 2 weeks. It was from Social Security, a statement, one of those annual summaries that shows your estimated benefit at different retirement ages. I had received these before, but had never really looked at them, the way you don't really look at something you're not ready to see. I looked at it that morning. I looked at it closely. I traced my work history and the numbers, the years of contributions, the wages reported, the long and continuous record of a person who had not stopped working since they were a teenager. And then I looked at the estimated monthly benefit, the number they told me I could expect to receive at full retirement age, assuming I continued working until then. And the number, when I saw it plainly, without the buffer of not looking directly at it, was not enough. It was not enough to pay rent in the city I lived in, not enough to cover basic medical costs, not enough by a significant margin to represent anything like financial security. It was a survival number, bare, minimal survival, with no cushion, no flexibility, no room for anything unexpected. I sat with that letter for a long time. I didn't cry. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the feeling that came over me was less acute than grief and more like a very slow, very quiet recognition. Like a person who has been slightly lost for a long time, finally looking up at a sign and confirming what they already suspected. I was 52 at the time. I had been working for over 35 years, and the official accounting of those 35 years in the language of financial security was not enough. You did all of this and it's not enough. I put the letter on the table and finished my coffee and sat there in the silence of that Saturday morning, and felt the full weight of something I had been successfully not feeling for a very long time. That morning changed something in me. Not immediately, not in a way that produced instant action. Change rarely works that way, at least not for me. But something shifted in how I was willing to see my situation. The comfortable vagueness I had been operating in, the sense that things were roughly okay, that they would probably work out, that I was managing, started to feel no longer available as a way of moving through my days. The letter had made something concrete and undeniable, and concrete and undeniable things are harder to look away from. Let me talk about what it actually means to spend your entire working life without building financial security, because I think people who haven't lived it sometimes underestimate what that experience is like from the inside. It is not one dramatic event. It is not a single catastrophic failure that you can point to and say, "There, that's where it went wrong." It is something much more gradual and much more insidious than that. It is 1,000 small moments of financial tightness. It is the specific calculation you run in your head every time you're at the grocery store, the one where you're adding up what's in the cart against what you think you have in checking, trying to make sure you don't go over. It is the way your stomach drops when something unexpected happens. A car repair, a medical bill, a broken appliance. Because unexpected things are not inconveniences in your life. They are crises, because you have no buffer to absorb them with. It is saying no to things because of money, while simultaneously telling yourself and other people that you just don't feel like it. It is attending social events and doing the math on what they cost the whole time you're there. It is the low, continuous hum of financial worry that you have lived with for so long that you have almost stopped noticing it. The way you stop noticing traffic noise when you've lived near a highway long enough. It's always there. You've just learned to function around it. But it is always there, and it costs you something daily, in energy and in peace and in the quality of your attention and your presence in your own life. There is also the particular loneliness of this experience, because money is still one of the things people are least willing to talk about honestly. We will tell strangers intimate details of our personal lives, our relationships, our health struggles, our family conflicts, but the actual state of our finances remains hidden behind a performance of normalcy that almost everyone maintains and almost no one questions. I have watched people my age at social gatherings discussing their retirement plans, their investment portfolios, their second homes, and I have nodded and contributed just enough to seem like part of the conversation, while inside I was doing that familiar calculation, that assessment of how much I could reveal before the gap between their reality and mine became too visible. That performance is exhausting. I have been performing it for decades, and the exhaustion is not just the energy of the performance itself. It is the loneliness underneath it, because when you are performing, you are not connecting. When you are managing what people see of you, you cannot also be seen. And the thing about financial struggle that nobody tells you is how isolating it is, not because people reject you when they know the truth, but because you reject the opportunity to be known before they ever have the chance to respond. You preemptively hide, and the hiding keeps you alone with it. I want to be honest about something that is uncomfortable to admit. Part of why I never built financial security is circumstantial, genuinely beyond my control. Wages that didn't keep pace with costs, jobs that didn't offer benefits or retirement plans, a family obligation that depleted savings at a critical time, economic conditions that made certain things much harder for people in my income bracket than the official narratives about hard work and opportunity suggested they should be. All of that is real, and I don't think it's accurate or fair to leave it out of the story, but part of it is also behavioral, and the behavioral part is mine to own. I spent money without a system. I made financial decisions reactively rather than proactively. I avoided looking at the full picture of my financial situation because the full picture was uncomfortable. And avoiding discomfort is something humans are wired to do, even when the avoidance makes everything worse in the long run. I did not educate myself about money, not because the information wasn't available, but because engaging with it felt like acknowledging a problem I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I treated my finances the way someone treats a strange noise in their car, by turning the radio up louder. The noise doesn't go away, it usually gets worse, but for a while you don't have to hear it. That combination, structural difficulty plus behavioral avoidance, is, I think, the real story of how a lot of people end up where I am. Not one or the other. Both. And the reason that matters is because if it were only structural, there would be nothing for an individual to do. And if it were only behavioral, the solution would be simple. Just make better choices, as if choosing better were easy for people who never had the information, the modeling, or the breathing room to do so. The real story is messier and more human than either of those clean explanations. The real story is a person doing the best they knew how to do with what they had, inside conditions that were genuinely difficult, and arriving at 55 without what they needed and needing to figure out what to do with that truth. I want to talk about the retirement question specifically because for people my age it is the question that sits at the center of everything. The question of what comes next. The question of whether stopping working is even a possibility, and if so, when and on what. I think about this question more than I think about almost anything else. I think about it when I wake up in the middle of the night. I think about it on my commute. I think about it in the quiet moments at work, when I look around at the younger people I work with, and do a mental comparison of where I was at their age versus where they might end up, and what those two trajectories say about what retirement is going to look like for me. Here is the honest answer to the retirement question as it applies to my life right now. I don't know when I can stop. I don't have a number I can point to, a savings balance or a retirement account or a combination of assets that would allow me to say, if I have this much, I can live on it for this long and be okay. Because the number doesn't exist. The account is not there in any meaningful form. What I have is Social Security eventually, which, as I've already established, is not enough on its own, and I have whatever I'm able to save between now and the point when my body or my circumstances force me to stop. That is it. That is the actual picture. And the fear that comes with that picture is real, and I am not going to minimize it by wrapping it in a lesson or a silver lining before I have fully let it exist. It is frightening to be this age and not know how you are going to survive the last decades of your life. It is frightening in a way that is different from the financial fears of earlier decades. When you are 30 and broke, there is an implicit promise in your youth. There is time. There is the sense that the situation is temporary by definition, that the future is long and things will shift. When you are 55 and broke, that implicit promise has expired. The future is shorter, the options are fewer. And the things that could still change the trajectory require effort and discipline and consistency at a point in life when you are tired, when the accumulated weight of decades of financial stress has already taken something from you, when starting over feels less like an adventure and more like a sentence. But here is where I have to be honest about something else. That fear, legitimate as it is, can also become a reason to do nothing. Because if I convince myself that it's too late, that the damage is done, that there's no point in trying at this stage, then I don't have to do the hard work of changing. The hopelessness becomes, perversely, a comfort, a reason to stay still. And staying still at this point is the one thing I genuinely cannot afford. So I have had to learn to hold two things at the same time. The honest fear of what my financial future looks like if nothing changes. And the honest possibility that things can still change, not dramatically, not in a way that erases the last 4 decades, but in a way that makes the next 2 decades meaningfully different. Both of those things are true. The fear is real, and the possibility is real. And living inside both of them simultaneously, without collapsing into either despair or denial, is the hardest work I have ever done. Harder than any job I have ever held. Let me tell you what changing actually looks like from where I stand, because I think there is a gap between the advice that gets given and the reality of trying to follow it when you are starting from where I am starting. The advice says, budget your money. The advice says, pay yourself first. The advice says, open a Roth IRA, maximize your contributions, take advantage of the catch-up provisions that exist for people over 50. The advice is not wrong. The advice is technically accurate. But the advice is designed for someone who has surplus, who has money left at the end of the month that isn't already spoken for, and for a significant portion of my working life, and for many people in situations like mine right now, that surplus is not there. You cannot save money you don't have. You cannot invest money that is already committed to rent and food and the minimum payments on debt that has accumulated because there was never enough to pay it down. So what you can do, what I am doing, is something smaller and less photogenic than the advice suggests. You look at every dollar with more attention than you've ever looked at it before. Not with obsession, not with anxiety, but with honest attention. You figure out where the money is going, all of it, and you ask for each outflow, whether it is truly necessary or whether it is a habit, a comfort, an automatic spending pattern that you've never consciously chosen but have simply never questioned. Some of what you find when you do that exercise is genuinely necessary. Some of it, surprisingly, is not. And the money that is not genuinely necessary, however small the individual amounts might seem, starts to add up when you redirect it consistently towards something that can grow. I started with $25 a week. That is what I could find at first, when I went through my spending with that level of honesty. $25 a week, redirected into a savings account that I treated as untouchable. My ego had a lot to say about $25 a week. My ego told me it was embarrassing, that it was too little to matter, that a man my age saving $25 a week was not solving any problem, was just performing the idea of saving without the substance of it. But I had listened to my ego's financial opinions for over 30 years, and they had not served me particularly well, so I decided to override it. $25 a week is $100 a month. $100 a month is $1,200 a year. $1,200 in a year is $1,200 more than I had the year before. It is not a retirement, but it is a beginning, and a beginning at any age is not nothing. The deeper change, though, is not in the number. The deeper change is in the relationship. The relationship with money, what it means, what it represents, what emotional weight it carries, how it intersects with my sense of self and my sense of worth and my sense of what kind of person I am and whether that person deserves security or stability or a future that is less precarious than my past. Because money, I have learned, is never just money. It is always also a story. And the story I had been telling about money for 5 decades was not a story that served me. The story I told was, money is what runs out. Money is what you work for and never quite have enough of. Money is the gap between what you need and what you have, always felt as a deficit, always experienced as a scarcity. That story was so deeply embedded that I had stopped being aware it was a story. It felt like truth, it felt like the nature of reality, at least the reality that applied to people like me. And when you believe that scarcity is simply the nature of your reality, you stop looking for exits from it. You adapt to it. You survive it. But you do not challenge it. Challenging it, at 55, after 55 years of it being the water I swam in, is one of the stranger experiences of my life, because it requires me to sit with a question that makes me genuinely uncomfortable. What if some of this was changeable earlier? Not all of it. Not the structural parts, not the wages that were too low or the system that was not designed for people with my starting point. But some of it. What if the behavioral patterns I inherited and never examined were doing as much damage as the structural conditions I couldn't control? What if the avoidance, the not looking, the turning up the radio to cover the noise, cost me something real and significant over the years? That question is uncomfortable, because it implies a kind of agency I'm not sure I was fully exercising, and acknowledging agency means acknowledging that different choices were, at least in some cases, available to me. And that is a harder thing to sit with than the narrative of pure circumstance. But I am sitting with it, because I think it's true, and because I think the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is the only starting point for anything real. I also want to talk about what this experience has done to my sense of identity, because I think that part of the story gets left out when we talk about financial struggle. We talk about the numbers. We don't talk enough about what living inside those numbers for decades does to how a person sees themselves. I grew up with a particular idea of what it meant to be a successful adult. The idea was, you work, you accumulate, you build. You show up as a young person, you put your time in, and the system rewards that time with stability and security. Home, savings, retirement, legacy. That was the deal. That was the implicit promise of the working life as I understood it. When the deal doesn't come through, When you have done the work for 35 or 40 years, and the stability and security have not materialized, there is an identity question that arises whether you want it to or not. If I did everything I was supposed to do, and I still don't have what I was supposed to have, what does that say about me? Is it possible to have worked your whole life and still be a failure? Or does the fact of the work in itself constitute a kind of success that the numbers don't capture? I have gone back and forth on this question for years. I have landed in different places at different times. Some days I believe deeply that the value of a life is not measured in assets. Some days I look at my financial situation and feel a shame so specific and so heavy that the philosophical answer doesn't reach it. What I am slowly coming to believe, not as a comfort but as a genuine conclusion, is that both things are true and both things need to be held. The work I did was real and it has value that is not fully captured in a balance sheet, and the financial situation I'm in is also real and has consequences that are serious and require honest engagement. Honoring the value of the work doesn't mean pretending the financial reality isn't what it is, and honestly engaging with the financial reality doesn't mean accepting a verdict on my worth as a human being. Both things are true. Neither cancels the other out. I want to speak to something about the American narrative specifically, because I think it is relevant to why so many people end up where I am while believing for so long that they wouldn't. This country tells a story about work and reward that is compelling, and in some respects true, and in other respects a significant oversimplification. The story is, hard work leads to success. Put in the time, show up consistently, be reliable, be good at what you do, and the system will recognize and reward that. And for some people, in some circumstances, in some time periods and economic conditions and starting positions, that story is accurate. But for a very large number of working Americans, particularly those who started without resources, without connections, without the kind of educational access that opens certain economic doors, the story doesn't hold. You can do everything the story asks of you and still find yourself at 55 with nothing to show for it in the financial sense. And the insidious part of the story is what it implies about the people for whom it doesn't work out. Because if the story is work hard and succeed, then the implied reverse is if you didn't succeed, you must not have worked hard enough, or you must have made bad choices, or there must be something about you, some flaw in character or discipline or effort that explains the gap between the promise and the reality. And many people, myself included for much of my life, internalize that implied verdict. We apply it to ourselves before anyone else has the chance to. We become our own harshest critics in a framework that was never quite fair to begin with. The truth is more complicated. The truth is that outcomes in this economic system are shaped by a combination of individual choices and structural conditions, and the structural conditions are not equally distributed. People who start further back have to run faster to reach the same point. People who don't have access to financial education, to professional networks, to the kind of employment that includes benefits and retirement plans and paths to advancement, face a different arithmetic than people who do. None of that excuses checking out, giving up, or refusing to take responsibility for the choices that are within your control. But it does mean that the simple equation of work equals reward has never been as straightforward as the story suggests. Understanding that has helped me, not because it takes the responsibility off me, but because it takes the shame off me. The shame that said, "This is all your fault." The shame that said, "You should have known better, should have done better, should have figured it out." The shame that kept me from looking at my situation clearly, because looking at it clearly meant looking at a supposed failure that I was too proud and too afraid to face. When I started to understand that my situation is the result of both personal choices and structural realities, when I stopped treating it as simply a verdict on my worth, I was able to look at it more clearly. And looking at it more clearly made action possible in a way that shame and avoidance never did. So what is the action? What does it actually look like to try to change a financial situation at this stage of life, with the resources I have and the time that remains? I want to be honest about this because I think the gap between what people are told to do and what is actually possible from where I'm standing is often enormous, and pretending it isn't doesn't help anyone. The action is not glamorous. It is not the kind of financial transformation story that gets made into a documentary or goes viral on social media. It is quieter and slower and more uncertain than that. It is a consistent monthly savings amount, however small, that I protect and do not touch. It is a budget that I actually follow, not perfectly, not every month without exception, but genuinely and consistently, and with the intention of understanding where every dollar goes. It is a reduction in spending that comes not from deprivation but from honesty, from asking which spending is genuinely aligned with what matters to me and which is automatic and unconsidered. It is also looking at income differently than I have looked at it before, not fantasizing about a different career or a passive income stream that will solve everything overnight, but genuinely and practically asking, is there any way I can generate additional income, even modestly, using what I already know how to do? Experience has value. Skills have value. Decades of work leave a person with capabilities that are real and sometimes transferable in ways that can supplement a primary income in small but meaningful ways. I am exploring this, not with the expectation of transformation, with the expectation of increment. Because increment, sustained over years, is how things actually change. I'm also doing something that has turned out to be more important than I expected, which is talking about this. Not with everyone, not in every context, but selectively and honestly, with people who can handle the truth and who have some capacity to help me think about it clearly. The isolation of financial shame is one of the most expensive things about it. Because when you cannot talk about something, you cannot get outside perspective on it, you cannot learn from others who have navigated it. You cannot access the knowledge and the support that exist around you in the world. Breaking the silence, even partially, even with one or two trusted people, changes the quality of the experience significantly. It does not change the balance in the account, but it changes how you carry it. And how you carry it affects whether you can do anything about it. There is something I want to say directly to anyone who is my age or near my age and is living a version of this story. Specifically to the people who are sitting with the fear that it is too late, that the window has closed, that the smart thing to do is just accept the situation and manage whatever decline comes. I want to push back on that hard, not because I think everything is fixable or that any amount of effort will produce a comfortable retirement for everyone reading this. Some situations are genuinely constrained in ways that no individual action will fully overcome. I know that. I am not here to sell you a fantasy, but I am here to tell you that the posture of giving up is the one thing guaranteed to produce the worst possible outcome. Every year between now and when you stop working is a year in which something could change, even incrementally, even slowly, even in ways that feel too small to matter until they accumulate into something that does. $50 a month for 10 years is $6,000. That is not retirement. But it is $6,000 that you did not have before. $6,000 is an emergency fund. $6,000 is a buffer. $6,000 is the difference between one bad month being a manageable setback and one bad month being a catastrophe. And at this stage of life, the buffer is not nothing. The buffer might be everything. I also want to say something about dignity, because I think one of the things financial struggle does over time is chip away at your sense of it. The small humiliations accumulate. The moments of having to say no, of doing the math at the grocery store, of avoiding certain conversations, of performing a financial normalcy you don't feel, of looking at a letter from Social Security on a Saturday morning and feeling the full weight of what it contains. Those moments leave marks. They leave a residue that is not just emotional but physical, stored in the tension in your shoulders and the quality of your sleep and the way you carry yourself through the world. But dignity is not something that your bank account can give you or take away, however much it can feel that way. Dignity is something you maintain or lose in how you respond to what life gives you. And one of the most dignified things I have done in my recent years is to stop pretending, to look at my situation honestly and say, this is where I am. This is the truth of my financial life. I am not ashamed of the work I did or the person I have been. I am honest about the results and committed to doing what I can with what I have from where I am. That commitment, that honesty, that refusal to either deny the problem or be destroyed by it is a kind of dignity that no amount of money can buy and no financial situation can take away. I am over 55. I worked my entire life. I started with very little, and I am arriving at this point in my life with not much more. That is the true account. And alongside that true account, I am still here. Still working, still thinking, still making choices, still capable of doing some things differently than I have done them before. The story is not over. It is in its later chapters, yes. The dramatic restructuring of earlier chapters is behind me, but later chapters can still be written well. Later chapters can still contain things worth having. Later chapters can still be, in the ways that matter most, a life worth living fully and honestly. I don't know exactly how my financial situation resolves. I don't know what retirement will look like, or when it will be possible, or what it will require me to give up or hold on to. I am still figuring that out, 1 month at a time, one honest look at a time, one $25 weekly transfer at a time. But I am figuring it out, which is different from what I was doing before. Before I was drifting, carried by the current, looking away from the thing I needed to look at most directly. Now I am looking. And looking is where everything starts. If you are living a version of this story, I want you to know that you are not alone in it. The shame wants you to believe you are alone in it, because alone you are more manageable. Alone you are easier to ignore, easier to keep quiet, easier to keep in the performance of normalcy that keeps the whole thing running. But you are not alone. There are millions of people in this country who worked hard their entire lives and do not have financial security. Millions of people who are arriving at the second half of life without what they were told hard work would produce. Millions of people sitting at kitchen tables with letters from Social Security and feelings they don't know how to name. You are not a failure. You are a person in a situation, and the situation, however difficult, however long in the making, however much it seems like it should be further along than it is not the final word on who you are or what is still possible. The final word is not written yet. Pick up the pen, look at the page honestly, and write the next part differently, even if differently just means $25 a week and a budget on a piece of paper and one honest conversation with one person you trust. That is where I am. That is what I know. And that for now is enough to keep going.